And our fifth habit is switch it. And we all know this is coming. This is one of the most requested topics of conversation. People want to know, how do we make transition smoother? How do we turn off the screens without a tantrum? How can we work through the tantrum? How can we hold our boundaries when tantrums are happening and all these big feelings, both from the kids and the grown-ups? I definitely experience the big feelings when my kid is having big feelings about the screen. I'm just like, it's the TV. We're not throwing fits about TV, which is like not the response I should have. So this is just count this as a personal coaching session for me because
Yep.
this one is really, really hard. But um, let's back up and just talk about transitions in general. Like, why is it so hard? Why can it be so hard to move from one thing to another for a young child or for a grown up?
Yeah, totally. I mean, change is difficult for most children and most adults in some way, shape, or form. And having to interrupt something you're enjoying is going to be hard, right? And having to move on from something you didn't finish to your satisfaction might be tricky. There's a number of reasons why having to move on from something that you're doing can be hard, right? A lot of times we expect children to move on without having been super clear about the expectation. So we might say, oh, we're going to leave in a bit. And one day a bit means 5 minutes, and one day a bit means 20 minutes. And that's pretty confusing on their end as to like, when are we leaving? What's going on here that way? So all these factors can kind of contribute to making transitions difficult. Combined with the fact that oftentimes kids are pretty skilled at negotiating or making it so they are able to extend that time a little bit in some way, shape, or form. And so, we joke all the time, but in what I do, we talk a lot about parents as being um kind of the slot machine, right? And like it only needs to pay off like every 1 in 100 times for your kid to keep putting pennies in the slots, right? Like there's a whole
Yes.
city that's devoted to that concept, right? So kind of knowing that the consistency with which you typically approach something can make a big difference in terms of like how it's going to go the next time.
Mm, okay. I see you. I get that. Okay.
Not the
Um,
easy answer, but it's true.
yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about some of the behaviors that we might see from our kids when we need to turn the TV off and say we have made it very clear and we've been consistent, but there's still some big feelings. What are some typical reactions, like maybe what a typical tantrum is versus like something that's maybe we need more help with? And then the big question, how do we respond in a way that promotes like connection and calm and cooperation, you know?
Totally. I mean, the truth of the matter is, often this is when we're going to see crying, we're going to see whining, refusal, maybe some unkind words or attempts at running away, maybe some aggression and that type of thing. And really, none of those things are incredibly atypical, right? I mean, truly, the way that we decide whether or not something is particularly problematic is how frequently it happens, how intense it gets, how long it lasts, right? So if you're seeing these types of behaviors, it's not really incredibly worrisome. It's bothersome, but it's not incredibly worrisome or concerning necessarily unless you're seeing them all of the time, or they can't really well, your kid is having a really difficult time being able to come around after that, or it seems like the trend of these things is getting worse and not necessarily getting better. So those are ways to kind of decide whether or not something is a little bit more problematic or concerning versus a little bit more typical. The truth of the matter is, it's really difficult for parents to regulate themselves when their child is in distress. And that's one of the number one things they really need to do is check in with themselves about, how am I going to stay calm? How can I not just accept that this behavior is happening, but maybe expect it in some way and have a plan for it, right? So I'm going to come in, I'm going to validate my kids' experience of this in some way, shape, or form. I'm going to do some soothing. I'm going to keep it really calm. And then I'm going to work towards distracting, or I'm going to kind of, set the line still. I'm still going to turn the screen off. And then I'm going to start playing with the blocks myself. And when they come over and join me, I'm going to make a big deal out of it. I'm going to praise it. I'm going to like make sure I let them know how proud I am for being able to get calm. Even if in your mind, right, again, your thoughts and feelings and behaviors are telling you the screen is not that big of a deal, or why are they doing this, or, good parents don't have kids who cry. Really trying to change the channel in your brain to like, there's no perfect parent. Kids cry. It's not the end of the world, because that will influence the feeling you're experiencing in that moment and will make it easier for you to have calm reactions, better behavioral responses to your child's needs in that way. So if you're thinking about your cognitive triad a little bit, checking in with yourself, that can also go a long way in terms of making it so that it is a little easier to hold the line, or it is a little bit easier to stay calm when they're getting so upset. You want to be really careful that you don't accidentally model for them. This is a big deal, right? By your big response. And you also want to be careful that you don't give a lot of attention to those behaviors so that they don't continue to use them and think they're going to be effective for them across time. So it's not an easy place to be as a parent, for sure. It does get better across time the more and more you have some practice with it, and the more and more you can really kind of, like I said, expect it and really use it as an opportunity to, okay, I'm building my parenting armor, or this is an opportunity for me to teach my child how to soothe themselves when they're disappointed or upset.
Yeah, this is definitely like a skill that I need to work on because yeah, when the kids are having big feelings, I just immediately am having big feelings. And one question I have is like how, especially when you are, say we've gotten into a negative loop, negative behavior loop here in my household. So, you're like, okay, I'm going to change my behavior. I'm going to check in with my feelings. I'm going to do what you just said. I'm going to be calm. What is the in that middle part of or that beginning part of kind of undoing the negative loop, how much do we put up with the kids' response? How much do I have to I mean, do I have to really just stay calm the whole time, no matter what they're doing? Like, how do you navigate? Well, my kid is still flipping out over there, and I'm calm, I'm happy, I'm playing with blocks, and maybe another kid joins, but the one kid is still, having the tantrum. Like, when do you set a boundary on, okay, that's enough of that response, or do you not do that?
I mean, it really it depends a little bit on the kid, but it also really depends, like, if it's dangerous or unsafe or aggressive, right? If it's dangerous, if it's unsafe, if it's destructive, it's aggressive, we're not ignoring that, right? Like,
Mhm.
we don't need to put a big bullseye around it to make it so it seemed like it was the end of the world with a loud response or big volume or increased tone. But we can be very matter of fact, oh, we don't throw, and remove the balls, right? Or remove the toys that they're throwing, or make sure that they're staying safe, or make sure that if they're trying to hit you, you move back. We have to have safe hands, right? Or, those types of things. So you don't have to ignore it, and you can provide natural consequences. You just want to be careful that you don't continue to like up the ante or increase the tone or the intensity of the interaction in a way that's going to get them even more ramped up. So it's a balance for sure. You also don't need to be completely a Pollyanna positive, right? You can say, like, I can tell you're having a hard time. I know that it's disappointing when we have to leave the park or when we have to be done watching Bluey. I get that that's really upsetting, right? And even in your mind, you might be thinking, we watch this a million times a day. This is not that big of a deal. But for them, it is, right? It really is upsetting. And so you want to give them some validation and some label and those types of things, but you also want to model for them about how long it makes sense to be upset about something, right? So on a scale of 1 to 10, this is a 5, or this is a 4. And so I'm going to give it a 4 response, right? And so honestly, sometimes keeping that in mind for yourself helps you to then decide, okay, what level am I going to let them ramp up to, or what kind of intensity am I going to let this kind of get to before I swoop in and distract or do something different.
When it comes to, transitions and establishing new feelings and new boundaries and sticking to them, what can families expect to see like improved behavior,
It honestly, again, it depends a little bit on the child, and most children are very resilient, actually. And it honestly, they're usually pretty quick learners, actually. If you can kind of get over the big hump of behavior initially, a lot of times it is a little bit quicker than you might expect. But it also depends on how long the previous routines or the
Mm.
previous habits were in place. So if you're working up against a habit that was, you know, 2 years old, right? We're not going to expect that that's going to change overnight necessarily, right? So we want to, kind of give it time and know that parents need to recognize small gains, right? So if you think a little bit about a tantrum, and I've worked a lot with parents who are experiencing tantrums, they don't know the difference between like a 28-minute tantrum and a 22-minute tantrum. But I do. I pay attention to that and I can tell you if the trend is going up or down, getting worse, that kind of a thing. So I'm not suggesting that you're always kind of keeping a stopwatch, but you do want to kind of make sure that you're giving yourself credit for small gains
Mm.
and that can kind of help a parent to stay in it or stay motivated in terms of keeping those skills going or kind of continuing to move forward with the transition in some way because they're like, oh, this is getting a little bit better. Or, oh, this used to go to a 9-10 so quickly, and now we're really more at a 6-7. 6-7 is still hard to manage and deal with, and you would prefer that it be a 2-3, but you're making some progress and making some gains.
I'm just thinking about families or kids who are maybe going from house to house and maybe have different routines in, a separated family or something like that, or maybe just the parents aren't on the same page and the responses aren't as united. How can we help those families either communicate through those differences or yeah, what would you say to families who are kind of in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that whether kids are in separate households or whether their parents just have slightly different ways of handling those types of things, most of the time kids learn the rule set, if you will, that is related to that situation or that person, right? A lot of times kids understand that what happens at home is not the same as what happens in school or the boundary surrounding this is a little bit different when dad's home versus when mom's home or when grandma's here or those types of things and kids can adapt to that. It's not always easy and it can contribute to a little bit of confusion on that part. So obviously whenever it's possible to communicate or to try to get closer to the same page or have the same types of cues or signals that indicate the end of a transition. Like, for instance, I work with a kid that every time he puts away his screen, they do a special handshake. And of course, it would be great if mom and dad and grandma and everybody knew the special handshake because that would make it a little bit easier. But certainly, he kind of knows, well, that's the handshake I do with dad, and that's the one that we usually do every day after lunch when I'm handing my iPad over or whatever it is type of thing. So, we want to give kids credit that they learn kind of based on the environmental factors. But the more that we can communicate, the more we can unite, the more that we can conceptually be on the same page about things, the better off the consistency and the learning is going to go for kids. The quicker they're going to pick up on those things.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, so you mentioned the handshake. That's such a cute idea. Do you have any other examples of making transitions a little bit easier, more fun?
Yeah, I think that, certainly there, just exactly the way that the cleanup song was created, you could create a song that goes along with putting your screens away or your devices down or putting it in the bin or putting it to sleep or something like that to make it a little bit more, enjoyable for kids or give them a little bit more opportunity to be engaged in that process. I think that honestly, with slightly older kids, there are times where they earn points or mini rewards for accepting a transition quickly and easily and being able to either earn more screen time later or be able to just get a lot of praise and attention in that moment for being able to be done quickly.
Mm.
As you said, a lot of parents sometimes will immediately go in their mind to this is not a big deal. And then that doesn't necessarily give their kid a lot of praise or acknowledgement when the kid does do the thing, appropriately. And so making it a big deal, like with praise or, a mini M&M or something like that, that can go a long way. Particularly like those things don't need to last forever. Sometimes they can be faded out gradually when the transitions are a little bit more smooth or a little bit more expected. But initially, if you're having difficulty kind of managing that, finding some way to motivate your child to hand things over can go a long way.
I love that. Okay, any recommendations for activities to help families build flexibility and that sense of openness?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for really young kids, we sometimes need to actually build it into our process, right? We might need to make it so that even though it would be nice for all of us to sit at the same place at the same, at the dinner table at night, maybe we mix up our seats and we let, there be some flexibility related to that routine or something like that in the day. For slightly older kids, 3 to 5, we actually want to label and praise the concept of flexibility for them across a number of different domains because they might not actually recognize when that's happening or even actually think about it in more of a generalized way. And so it's honestly saying, "Oh, I love the way that you're being so flexible, or I love the way that you decided to do something a little bit different with the trains today," or really trying to make sure that they get credit for it. And adults honestly have to also sometimes reprogram themselves to be willing to be a little bit more flexible or share anecdotes about how flexibility led to a great result or the same result. I drove home this way on Friday. I'm going to drive home this way on Thursday, but we're still going to get home, right? So, really helping them to think a little bit about how even being flexible can yield the same result.